therapist, author, and your host of the I Don't Think We Talk Enough About podcast, where each week I'm joined by wonderful guests who bring their warmth, wisdom, and wealth of experience to talk about the things I just don't think we talk enough about. And this week, I'm thrilled to welcome Britt Piper. She's a leading expert in somatic healing. And together, we'll explore what somatic healing is, how to better understand your nervous system, and how we can use our body to heal from trauma. We'll also discuss practical ways to support your body in moving it out of survival mode and into a state of balance and resilience. Britt speaks from such deep personal experience, and actually it is that experience that just radiates through, that you just feel so drawn to her, and she's such a trusting soul. Her story truly is just so inspiring and so full of hope. I know my listeners will feel truly supported and safe in her wisdom. Britt, welcome. Welcome to my podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, it's honestly so beautiful to meet you online. And I followed you for so long on Instagram, and your beautiful healing page, Heal with Britt, that just is such a resource for so many people. And I know so many of my listeners will love to follow that account. And I'm just so excited that you're here today to chat about your account, but chat about your work and to chat about your beautiful new book.
Yes, it's exciting. And I know we were talking ahead of time. There's so many different directions this conversation could go because it's such personal work, I think, for both of us. So yeah, I'm just excited to chat.
Yeah, and your book, just for people, unfortunately, I don't have a hard copy, so I got a PDF, and so I've read it and devoured it, and just, it's beautiful. And I'd actually like to start by reading something out from it. But do remind people when it's coming out.
March 25th. So just under 2 weeks. So the book is called Body First Healing. And it is, I do have a physical copy.
Brilliant. Oh, it's beautiful.
Copy coming your way once it's out in the UK. But yeah, Body First Healing, getting unstuck and recovering from trauma with somatic healing.
Wonderful. Britt, I kind of want to acknowledge before we dive in, I think, one, as a therapist, but also as a mother and also as a deeply caring human, that you really have had a difficult time. And I think you're so open with that in the book. And I can feel just in my nervous system now, as I'm saying it, I feel a little bit shaky because you speak from such experience of nervous system dysregulation, from things that were completely outside of your being, that had just the biggest and most profound effect on your life. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I was feeling the shakiness too.
Yeah, I could feel it.
I think that I always say that my work started off as me search, a lot of like my own personal, a lot of my own personal and professional, a lot of my personal experience laid the foundation for who I am now in a professional lens as a somatic experiencing practitioner and someone who really loves to advocate for and inform people about these more, you could say, alternative approaches to trauma recovery, but also being really open about my story in a way that's also supportive and not too much for people. Being so open, I think, was really a direct warring against the way that I grew up, which was we take our hard stuff and we throw it under the rug and we pretend like it's not there. And so, I had some pretty big turning points in my life, and I'm sure we'll talk about those in our conversation today, but it was a bit of a wake-up call of like, you can't run from your past anymore, and what has happened, and just because you're avoiding it doesn't mean that you're processing it or healing it. And you have to face it at some point. And so I did that. When I do anything, I do it with like 150%. So I did it with almost like this radical acceptance of this is what I've experienced. But also when I started to talk about it, I realized that me sharing created like this courage to share became contagious for others. And it became this little like community of everyone being like, I wish I had people that I could talk to in this way, that I could be my authentic self with. And so that's really driven a lot of just my desire to show up raw and messy and
Mm.
vulnerable at times, but also in a way that encourages others to just be in their humanness and know that that's okay and that it's going to be accepted.
I think it's your sharing and your rawness and that human layer that does give people the courage to go there themselves
Mhm.
and to see that healing is possible. I wonder, would you mind if I just read out the opening paragraph of your
Yeah,
book? Because
of course.
oh, I felt like I was swelling with pride, just like reading it, just knowing the work that I do as well, and just seeing that growth and healing is possible. And your life could have looked just so completely different, Britt. I mean, you know that. It could
Mhm.
have just so different. And we'll come to what that pivotal moment was. But I just wanted to read this. As I type this letter to you, my dear reader, I am sitting at my kitchen counter with my 4-month-old daughter still sound asleep in her car seat beside me. We just arrived back home from running a few errands. My 3-year-old son is at the park with our nanny, and my husband is upstairs in his office working. In the background, a shuffled blend of Celine Dion radio plays lightly through the house speakers, filling my quiet and sun-soaked home with echoed melodies that remind me of my childhood. Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, and Phil Collins, to name a few. To many, this might seem like just another boring day, but for younger me, the 20-something Brit, literally battling for her life, this was the type of day I couldn't have even dreamed of. A day devoid of chaos and unhealthy behaviors in the name of survival.
I'm tearing up again.
Oh,
That's
I
my
felt tearful.
I haven't heard anyone read it back to me before, so that was really beautiful. And by the way, your voice is the best voice to hear reading it back. It's just so sweet. So,
Oh, you're so kind. There's so many layers in
yeah.
that opening paragraph. So
Mhm.
much of your story of it's almost incredible that you're here where you are now when people who will read your book, and I really urge people to understand what your beginning was,
Yeah.
and you're just sitting here in front of me now, but doing your incredible work around the world, healing others. It's possible. And, you know, you're such a gift. And I can't thank you enough for sharing your work. I really can't. So thank you.
So much.
Um,
Thank you.
but I wonder whether, because I want to dive into some of the subjects and the topics that you bring so beautifully to both Instagram and your page, but also your proper work and the book. This is a huge question, but for many of the listeners here, they might not have a full grounding understanding of it. You've done a lot of your trauma work with Peter Levine, haven't you? And did you train through somatic experiencing?
Yeah, Somatic Experiencing International.
Do you want to start with a gentle definition of what trauma is?
Yeah.
Because we do hear that word thrown around an awful lot. Yeah. And
Mhm.
I just wonder whether you could just give some context to it.
Yeah. So the easiest definition that I've kind of constructed from, I'm trained in somatic experiencing. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner, but I also train at the Polyvagal Institute under Stephen Porges and Deb Dana, and that's kind of the new upgraded science, if you will, of the nervous system. And then I have backgrounds in somatic attachment therapy and somatic internal family systems therapy. So, inner child work, attachment work, nervous system, and somatics. And from all of those kind of blended modalities, my definition is that trauma is any experience that overwhelms the nervous system's capacity to cope. And when this happens, your nervous system essentially gets stuck in the survival responses, whether it's fight, flight, shut down, freeze, fawn, or functional freeze, those 6 states. It gets seemingly stuck in those survival responses of the past. And there is a beautiful quote by Peter Levine, that says that trauma is any experience that essentially where we become frozen in time. And it's like an internal straitjacket where our ability to move forward in life becomes nearly impossible. And that's because this internal straitjacket is the nervous system, right? It's this armoring up of protective and survival responses that are mainly subconscious, mainly through the body. We don't know that they're happening. They're happening through muscle memory and emotional memory and what we call our procedural patterns. But it's us staying kind of stuck in this loop, which scientifically speaking, we call the stress response cycle. We're stuck in this stress or this threat response cycle, still trying to survive what happened in the past, but here in the present day. And
Yeah.
so this can manifest in behavioral, mental, emotional, physical symptoms and challenges in our everyday life. And really what it ultimately comes down to is that, trauma isn't necessarily found in the story. It's found in the nervous system. And until the nervous system says that the trauma is over, we are going to remain stuck in those responses. So, in the somatic world, we work with the nervous system and the body to help ourselves become untethered or unstuck from survival mode, essentially allowing the nervous system to catch up to what the brain already knows, which is that we're safe and we're okay, even though the nervous system might not feel that way yet.
I love the way you explained that. Would it be, I think it would be quite helpful to give some examples of
Mhm.
different types of trauma
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
everything gets quite thrown together at times, doesn't it? But you so beautifully in your book separate them.
Yeah. So, trauma, again, is going to be dependent on each nervous system. So I think that's always important to state at the beginning because often we talk about, someone asked the question yesterday. I put a little Q&A box in my Instagram stories and someone said, if I haven't had big T trauma, is this book still good for me? And first of all, I also like to say that this book is good for anyone with a nervous system,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely. Yeah,
right.
everyone,
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah, because nervous system work and somatic work, it's not just for trauma recovery. Yes, it's such a great tool, but it's also foundational work for just having an overall better quality of life, better relationships, better health, better relationship with yourself, more authenticity. But anyway, someone asked that question of if I haven't had big T trauma. And so big T trauma is usually considered like shock trauma or acute trauma, catastrophic things that we commonly think about is trauma, like assault, car accidents, sudden loss, right? Sudden diagnosis. And then big T, I'm sorry, that's big T trauma. Then small trauma is the more nuanced traumas. And these aren't more so like events, but more so experiences that happen over time, right? So maybe neglect, suppression, maybe not having caregivers around and present, or they're intermittently around when we're younger, but betrayal, things like that.
Mm.
However, because it is nervous system dependent, trauma is so relative to each person. So the example that I give in the book is that let's say that Johnny and Freddie live next to each other and they're both, I don't know, 7 years old, they're neighbors. And Johnny comes from a home where one caregiver is traveling a lot for work. He sees them very rarely. And the other caregiver that's home is, struggling with substance abuse. It doesn't feel like a safe environment for him. That's Johnny. Freddie comes from an environment where both parents are present more often than not, and they have regulated nervous systems themselves that can mirror and support his, right? Can help calm his dysregulated system. It feels like a safe environment. One day they both get on the bus and they get bullied in the same way by the same bully, same punches thrown, same words said, and they both retreat back home, visibly shaken up in their survival responses.
Yeah.
And so Johnny goes home to an environment where one caregiver is gone again on another work trip. The other caregiver is asleep on the couch. He wakes up this caregiver, tells them what happens, and they say, "Go to bed. I don't have time for this right now." Right? "Stick up for yourself next time. Leave me alone." And they shoo them off. And so Johnny goes back into his bedroom and he stays stuck. he doesn't come out of that place of danger in his body. He stays stuck in that stress response cycle because there's not safety around to help disarm that nervous system. But Freddie, I think I'm getting this right. I think it was Freddie. I don't know if I'm getting them mixed up. Freddie goes home to an environment where his caregivers are there and they sit with him and they attune to him and they validate and they allow him to express how he feels, to cry. They comfort him, they co-regulate with him, and then they say, we're going to go to the principal tomorrow and we're going to make this right. Right? This won't happen again. He feels safe. Yeah, he feels safe and his armor is able to be removed. And so for Johnny, he might look back at that time in his life as being a traumatic moment. But for Freddie, and again, I don't know if I mixed them up, Freddie, he might look back at that experience as just a blip in the radar, right? Because his environment was different. And so I think that's important to say is that, the list of trauma that we can experience is endless, but it's also going to be dependent on the environment that that nervous system is in and whether or not there's safety to help them come out of it. So I'm not a big fan of like big T, small t trauma because what could feel like a big T trauma to someone could feel like a small t to someone and vice versa. So how I like to kind of separate them is by direct trauma and indirect trauma. So direct trauma, it happens directly to you, and that could be acute trauma, which is a single event that is kind of sudden, or it could be chronic trauma, which is not a single event, but more so an experience that happens over time. So these are things like abuse, neglect that I talked about earlier, living without security, living in poverty, being subjected to mental health or substance abuse in the home, right? These are part of the ACEs studies. That's more chronic trauma. And then there's complex trauma, which is kind of what I kind of think of as like compounded trauma. So there's the original trauma, but then there's a traumatic aftermath.
Yeah.
And so complex trauma and CPTSD, I know, are becoming much more a part of the conversation. And then lastly, there's indirect trauma. So under that umbrella, right, that's vicarious trauma, secondary trauma. I work a lot with first responders and the military and violent crimes units. And you see a lot of that in the helping professions of people who are, you could say, exposed to trauma. They start to take on the same traumatic symptoms. But this is also where intergenerational trauma falls in, which I talk about quite a bit in the book and about my own experience with intergenerational trauma, right? So what gets passed down indirectly.
You do. Actually, Britt, do you want to talk about that a little bit more? Because it's fascinating the way you explain that in the book.
Yeah.
It's they did that. What was the experiment you brought in with the
Cherry blossoms.
yes, with the cherry blossoms? It's
Yeah,
it's,
fascinating.
it's mind blowing, isn't it?
Yeah, so and if people want, of course, there's my book, but one book that I always recommend my clients when they really want to explore the deeper layers of intergenerational trauma would be the book by I think it's Mark Wolin. It's called "It Didn't Start with You." It's a beautiful book about the study of epigenetics, and the study of epigenetics essentially provides that trauma can get passed down through generations. The current research shows up to maybe 5 generations. And so it's part of our inheritance. We don't just inherit things, we inherit experiences and also adaptive responses within our biology. So the experiment that you're talking about, essentially what they did was they took a mouse and they would present a smell of cherry blossoms for the mouse. And as they did that, they would shock the mouse, and the mouse would create a startle response. So anytime there was cherry blossoms around this mouse, it would start to go into this kind of anxious startle response, even without the shock. And what they found is that not just the mouse's grand mice, I don't know, but their great grand mice also had this same startle response to the smell of cherry blossoms, even though they had not smelled the cherry blossoms or I'm sorry, even though they had not been shocked
Yeah.
themselves. And in addition to that, they found that the olfactory systems, essentially the structures of the nose in the mice, were actually altered to better smell and detect cherry blossoms. And so, I mean, really everything about us, when you think about our nervous system, our biology, we were brilliantly built and wired to survive. And
Mm.
this is one way that essentially our biology allows parents to prime our children for experiences that were traumatic that they've experienced. And with the Holocaust studies, it's more so that they found that the descendants of Holocaust survivors, their grandchildren had altered or higher levels of stress hormones across the board compared to grandchildren of, who were not descendants of Holocaust survivors. So, intergenerational trauma essentially holds that our DNA and our hormones get passed down. And if they're altered because of trauma, that also gets passed down to
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
children.
I think that's such interesting research for people to hold on
Yeah.
to to really understand how these patterns get passed down and what can happen. But
Mhm.
also being informed of it and having that awareness can really help change the way you parent,
Yes.
can't it? So it's just fascinating. And that's why your book is for everyone,
Yeah.
even those who aren't parents, but just how we're relating to other people,
Mhm.
understanding what state their nervous system could be in. It just brings so much more understanding. And that brings me on to, I loved the part where you mentioned in the book about the five, I think it was five personality types based on the stress response.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
love the way you brought, because I'd not thought of it like that, but I loved the way that you brought that in there. Do you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I personally experienced in my own recovery from trauma becoming a different version of myself in seasons of my recovery, becoming angry all of a sudden over a couple of years. And I share in the book how that ultimately I landed in a jail cell because of that. Um,
Yes.
and what I realized is that that was my nervous system being stuck in a fight response because of something that I experienced where I was not able to fight back. I mean, I was quite literally and physically, that fight response was overpowered by somebody.
Yeah.
But that was still stuck in my body. And so I was stuck in this loop of fight, and I became someone again that I did not recognize. And whenever I work with clients, the big word that's usually right in that intake form is I feel stuck.
Yeah.
I feel stuck in life. And that stuckness is that stress response cycle where we get stuck again in these states, these survival states that don't feel authentic to who we are. So those five stuck states, I did mention earlier that our nervous system kind of goes into those six predictable responses. However, one of them that I mentioned, which is the freeze response, we don't really stay stuck in the freeze response. The freeze response, think of it like a deer in the headlights. Your body goes into tonic immobility, right? And we kind of freeze. Your body doesn't, you can't stay chronically stuck in that. But the five stuck states, which over time can feel like personalities, even though they
Mhm.
don't feel authentic, the five stuck personalities or states are fight, flight, which is like fear, anxious, worry. The third one is shutdown. So this is kind of, according to the new science, this is kind of like the freeze response.
Yeah, the
But
numbing, the
shutdown,
withdrawal, that
yeah,
yes.
exactly. You can think of it like hibernation,
Yeah.
immobilization. You retreat from the world. And this is where a lot of the clients that I work with, they experience chronic fatigue, depression, burnout, fibromyalgia. So that's number three. Number four is the fawn response, right? So appeasing, people pleasing, placating, pacifying, peacekeeping, all of those
Yeah.
things. And then the last one is functional freeze, which I know is a very popular, nervous
Yeah.
system state to talk about right now. But that's kind of where, and I think a lot of people are here without recognizing it. It's going through the motions without emotion. So it's kind of muscling through, armoring through life, but we have a hard time connecting to our body, to our sensations, to our feelings, and there's a lot of emotional suppression, which over time can lead to, chronic mental, physical, emotional symptoms.
But what I love about you bringing it in as a personality type, which makes so much sense, and I'm not sure why I hadn't connected the dots, is it's really helpful for people to look at the way they're being and think,
Mhm.
oh, I am stuck in survival mode because I'm always angry or I'm always agitated or I just thought it was me. I just thought it was
Mhm.
my personality. You're really giving them agency here that this
Yeah.
is what's going on. And I wonder, because I know we don't have loads of time today, Britt, but I wonder whether it would be worth you starting to talk about I have so many more questions about trauma, but I want to move on to your body first healing. Do you want to explain to people listening what somatic therapy and somatic work is? This might
Mhm.
be really new to people, talking about the top down, bottom up and differentiating between those.
Yeah. I think what most people are familiar with when it comes to traditional therapy is the top-down approach, which is where we focus on working with the top part of the brain, which is the neocortex or the thinking, talking, cognitive brain. And
Mm.
so the language that's often used in conventional therapy is talk therapy, right? We're talking and thinking through things. And here we really focus on conscious memory, verbal memory, right? That we can consciously remember, narrative memory.
Yeah.
Somatic therapy is different in the sense that we take a bottom-up approach. So we work with the bottom parts of the brain, what we call the subconscious, below the conscious, the subconscious parts of the brain, which is the brain stem, which is the reptilian brain, right? Like our survival brain. So the language here is sensation and impulse. And then we work with the midbrain, which is the emotional brain, the limbic system. And this is where the nervous system really operates from, is from this subconscious brain. So the language of the subconscious brain is somatics. Soma means of the body. So when you work with a somatic therapist, you are working with the language of sensation, emotion, impulse, feeling. And we work with not so much verbal, conscious memory, but body memory.
Mhm.
And a big reason for that is because where we store our verbal memory, what we call explicit memory that you can explain, the hippocampus. The hippocampus, in many ways, when we experience trauma, becomes, you can almost think of it like it becomes disconnected.
Yeah.
And so traumatic memory is predominantly stored in our body,
Yeah.
what we call implicit memory. So this shows up as emotional memory, right? So an example is when you think about, so for instance, I lost my brother, and anytime I see his car, which is very rare, he had a very rare car, and anytime I see his car, even though he passed away over 20 years ago, when I see his car, the emotions of grief come back up.
Yeah.
Right. So there's emotional memory, there's sensory memory, right? When we hear something and then our body, let's say you're at a large gathering, right? You're at a hockey game and there's pucks flying and smacking on the ice and your body is jumping, jumping, jumping. You feel sensitive. And that's your body going back to sensory memory of maybe when there were things thrown around in your house while you were hiding in your bedroom and your parents were fighting. So we work with emotional memory, sensory memory, procedural memory, which is kind of like muscle memory, right? So when conflict arises, or I'll see this in my work and in my practice, when someone starts to feel angry about something, and I'll say, how does that anger come up? And I see the rising, but then I immediately see that there's now a downward gaze and that their shoulders are coming forward and they're closing off the chest, right? I'm seeing as a practitioner, oh, their body is suppressing that anger and going into a shutdown right now. And so these are patterns that we pick up on in posture and micro movements. Somatic experiencing, Peter, when he built this framework back in the 70s, a lot of it was based on, I always get it wrong, either ethology or ethnology. They're two different things, but the study of animals in the wild. And so somatic practitioners, we kind of study humans. And so when I'm working with a client, I can see things like, oh, their shoulder diaphragm just lifted on the right. And that's body memory talking to us. Like maybe there was an impact from a car accident from the right. The body is always, always telling us a story. And what's so fascinating is that, first of all, conventional therapy is so incredibly important, right? But as I say in the book is body first healing because until the nervous system is kind of out of that stress response cycle, it's hard for us to access that verbal memory. because the hippocampus and everything is still kind of disconnected. So that's why we work with the body first. It's a body first approach. We regulate the nervous system, and then we move into cognitive work, which is meaning making, being able to be witnessed by someone, repair work, and things like that.
And as you were talking there, I was thinking about how so many people have that mind body disconnect. And for
Mhm.
some people, I'm sure when they first come to you, they are so eager just to talk.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
actually, they're very cognitive.
Hmm.
And actually, when you say to them, and that's why it's with as somatic practitioners, we're looking all the time at the signs we see. They're not even aware that their body is moving in that way, or their body is telling a story, or
Hmm.
they've even shifted or moved. They're not even aware they've done it. They just want to talk. And
Hmm.
so if you even say, as I'm sure you have, what is it what sensations are you noticing? That they would say, well, none.
Right.
And they just it's a blank. And actually what's incredible about that, I always feel, is sensation was our first language.
Hmm.
There's so much there in it. And that
Hmm.
that beautiful journey of when people realize they can start to feel their body,
Yeah.
then that's when you can work with the mind.
Absolutely.
You have to heal. And I love the way you've explained so beautifully just how trauma stays stuck in the body without us realizing.
Mhm.
And people staying in those very stuck states. And you have a beautiful section in your book about, I can't remember if it's a chapter or if it's just a small subpart, but I was really intrigued by it. It was talking about, can trauma be completely healed?
Mm.
And that's a question that comes up all the time. People avoid therapy because they can't imagine they can be,
Yeah.
healed. I'd love you to just share your incredible wisdom on that.
Yeah. So I think it depends on what your perspective of healed, and I'm using air quotes here for those who can't see me, what healed means. So if your perspective is that being healed means I will never be triggered by my trauma again, can my anxiety disappear? Or can I move on from this, right? Can this be in the rear view? If that's your perspective, then you probably won't find that you are healing from trauma because just like how Bessel says in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, and there's the wonderful book by Babette Rothschild, The Body Remembers, our nervous system and our body will never, ever forget what has happened to us. And it will lovingly, although it's not comfortable, it will lovingly remind us in moments where it feels like that thing is about to happen again. Right. And that might happen through, oh, I'm feeling anxious right now because of the way that that person just looked at me. And that's reminding me of, the look I got when I was younger. Our body will always remember us because that's what it's wired to do. So it's less about not being triggered. It's more so about creating a greater capacity that when we are triggered, we don't get stuck there. We know how to move through it. We have a greater capacity and resilience to, ride the waves of, oh, I'm triggered and now I'm back to baseline. Oh, I'm triggered, now I'm back to baseline. So, yeah, healing, if you look at it in that way, um, I always say that healing is a lifelong journey, not like a single destination. And I'm sure, as you know, in your personal work and in your professional work, there's layers, right? We use that onion analogy.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's always something new to find. And I found that myself. And yeah.
Always. I think that's a beautiful way to say it. So to take the pressure off of people thinking that that they're meant to forget, or it's not about that. It's about, as you say, building those resources to ride the wave.
Yes.
We're talking about the window of tolerance here, aren't we? Widening that window of tolerance so they can cope better and that they can feel happiness again,
Hmm.
joy again. They're not stuck in that survival mode. My book, Choose You, is out now and offers you ways to prioritise you, meet your needs, say yes to you, develop a more secure sense of self where you feel you matter, learn to set boundaries, wrap yourself in self-love, find your authentic self, and ultimately choose you in the same way you would want those you love to choose themselves too. Choose You, out now. Before we move on to the Instagram questions,
Mhm.
from my community. Do you have a favorite somatic practice? Is there something you love to personally do or?
Yeah, it's going to be, nervous system dependent. For me, nature, access to nature is huge for me. So whether it's opening my, and I live in an area where I'm not surrounded by nature, I'm in the suburbs. So whether it's opening windows, whether it's letting light in the morning, we take a lot of trips as a family hiking. We actually just bought 10 acres of land in Montana in the mountains. And so it's like, I dream of being there half the year with my kids just running around free. And I've done a lot of healing retreats through my practice, and they're usually outside of national parks. Incorporates nature. I talk a lot in the book too about how we are nature and the cyclical creatures that we are, and the cycles of our nervous system is really tethered to nature. And you see those same cycles in nature as well. So nature is big for me. And then also co-regulation. So being with right now in this season, it used to be, my husband, but cuddling with my kiddos. I have a 1.5-year-old and a 4.5-year-old. And so cuddling, smelling their hair, running my fingers through their hair and just being present in those small moments that I get to do that, that really helps my system to regulate and become more grounded.
I love the way you shared that. And I love the way I can see just watching you how that brings such calm to you and your nervous system. And this is what your work's about, isn't it? And the work you're doing is people being able to notice that in themselves, noticing that they're shifting out of a stuck feeling, shifting out of anger, being able to catch their nervous system's shifting states. But even if it's tiny,
Mm.
that then, as I say it all the time on Instagram and with people I know, just look for that tiny shift gives you the hope that movement forward is possible.
Yeah.
And not putting that pressure on yourself that it has to be big. It can be tiny.
Yeah, and big to the nervous system could cause you to start to move
Oh,
backwards.
of
So we
course.
always say big equals backwards,
I love
small
it.
equals, yeah. There's a saying we like to say is that like working slower and smaller is actually faster when it comes to nervous system work.
I love it. I've
Yeah.
got some brilliant questions from my Instagram community that will help bring in some of your work as well here. Obviously, we don't know context. It's just those little squares that come up on Instagram for the question. And the first one we've got is, how do I move out of fight, flight, and being hypervigilant
Mhm.
when I feel so stuck in it?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I can introduce very quickly because it's such an easy to understand visualization, the polyvagal ladder.
Yeah.
So the polyvagal ladder is the nervous system ladder. You can do a quick little Google search, but it's also, I have graphics of it in the book and everything. So at the top of the ladder, there's 3 sections. At the top is rest and digest. It's kind of like what we call your safe and connected state of ventral. In the middle of the ladder is fight or flight, your sympathetic state, where we're mobilized with adrenaline and cortisol. And at the bottom of the ladder is your shutdown state, kind of like freeze, but that's called dorsal. And this is your immobilized state. However, keep in mind you still have adrenaline and cortisol down here, it's just being suppressed. So, in order to move from fight or flight, what we're talking about here, back up to ventral, you have to do something that we call discharge. A lot of people often think that when I'm anxious, I need to be calm. I need to calm myself down. And I'll give you the 3E formula. When you experience activation, okay, you have adrenaline, cortisol, you're down in those bottom states, those survival states. We need to first experience the body. So notice, how is my body showing me I'm anxious right now? Right? And maybe that's the clenching in your chest. Maybe it's the fidgeting. Maybe it's the sweating in your hands, the change in temperature, the gut dropping. Noticing that, observing it for maybe just, 30 to 60 seconds. And then you ask the question, what happens next? Is there something my body wants to do? So that takes you from experience, which is the first E, to the second E, which is express. Is there an expression that your body wants to do? Maybe it's, ugh, right? Like actually vocally expressing.
Yeah.
Maybe it's that tears start to emerge. Maybe it's that you want to shake your hands out. Maybe your body wants to actually move or roll or stretch. So look for micro movements or changes in posture. And that leads you into the third E. So usually when we allow the body to go through this cycle, right, and metabolize and move through that emotional charge of adrenaline and cortisol and discharge it, that leads to expressing. So now we're expressing or discharging those hormones. Think of it like a pressure cooker. We're lifting the lid so that those stress hormones can be released rather than stuck in the body. So it's less of what can I do to calm down and more so of how can I meet my anxiety right now with curiosity and see, is there something my body wants to do with this?
Brilliant. Because what you've done there, Britt, is not give someone advice when you don't know them.
Yeah.
Because what could work for someone might not work for another person.
Yeah.
So this brings agency to the person, doesn't it? Like you say, you want to shudder or roll or move, or someone else might not. They might want to make a sound or scream, or it's a brilliant way of putting it. And I think, so often people think we have to follow a rule book, but
Mhm.
actually it's your body, your rules, isn't it?
Yes.
What
And
works for
and
you.
your body has the answers. We just often
Yes.
don't know how to listen or we don't know the language,
I
right?
love
So,
that. And you talk about the three E's in your book, so it's just fantastic. I'm overwhelmed at work with
mm,
every interaction I get at work. It causes a disproportionate stress response. So they're recognizing that everything is causing this energy, and
yeah.
they've said, help.
Okay. So your nervous system, think of your nervous system like a security system. It's always working in the background to protect you. And it's scanning for, right? So subconsciously through the body. And it's scanning through the senses. Am I safe? Am I not safe? Am I safe? Am I not safe? We call this neuroception. It's the act of neuroception, but this happens in three places. It's scanning internally in your body for signs of safety or danger. Is my stomach clenching or is it, oh, I feel relaxed? It happens outside in your environment. Is there a car coming at me or no, I can walk across the crosswalk? And it happens between you and other nervous systems. So your nervous system is always scanning other systems for signs of safety or signs of welcome or signs of warning, right? Vocal tone, facial expression, body language. So we call this inside, outside, between, this scanning. Inside, outside, between. And if we have moments where we feel like our nervous system is constantly alarming in one of those channels, in this case, it would be between. I'm looking at all the other nervous systems around me like a threat, and it feels disproportionate. Then what we can do is we can start to support the other channels of neuroception. So this might be, is there a place in my body that feels easier to be with right now? Is there a place in my body that feels more comfortable, that feels more settled? I'm noticing that in my feet. My feet feel grounded. And take 60 to 90 seconds to just track that. As I track the groundedness in my feet, what else do I notice? And maybe you notice, oh wow, there's a lot of groundedness or there's some sturdiness in my legs and my hips right now. And I feel sturdy right now. Yeah, and how does that feel to just feel sturdy? Right. And then I just noticed I took a breath.
Yeah, me too.
So that calms the system. And you can also do that outside, right? So inside, outside. And we call this exploratory orienting. So your nervous system is always communicating with the sensory motor system. And so you can use your eyes, your ears, your nose, all of your sensory, centers to start to just orient and to take in the environment around you very slowly. And as you do this, you'll track internally and how is my body experiencing this? So as I noticed that wonderful picture of my husband and I from our honeymoon, what do I notice in my body? Well, first of all, I'm going back to a memory that's really lovely, like being in Venice. And I'm thinking of the canals and all the limestone and the buildings and the music. And oh, there's like a little flutter of excitement. And that feels really good. So that's one way that you can start to support yourself. And then also, when you do notice moments that you do feel safe at work with others, savor that.
Mm.
Even if it's just noticing, wow, I'm not activated right now, talking with Rebecca in the lunchroom. Like this actually feels really nice. Really track that in your body. How does this feel nice in my body right now? Because the more that we can create what we call attentional networks from the brain down to the body of this feels safe, the more it starts to expect that, right? The more that your nervous system will seek for that rather than always seeking for danger.
beautifully expressed. And I love that kind of finding the places you can feel safe
Mhm.
at work, so it doesn't all feel like a danger. But I guess there's another picture that could come in there, that once you've got that, your executive functions of your brain will be optimized, which means you can then make choice.
Mhm.
You can start to think about, is this job right for me? Do I need to be looking elsewhere? But very often when we're stuck in survival mode, we can't access that, can we? And I
No.
remember Deb Dana always saying that actually, to be our safest, we need to be out of survival mode. But we
Mm.
always go into survival mode to survive, but actually we need to
Love
be
that.
out of it. And she's
Yeah.
so right, isn't she?
Yeah.
We need to
Yeah.
actually be out of survival mode to be our safest version. Britt,
Mhm.
I know you need to go. I can't thank you enough. It's just been gorgeous. I could have chatted for
I know.
hours with you.
I know. I
Um,
wish we had more time, and
I
this was
know.
such a full conversation. So I still have 60 to 120 seconds. So we're
No, it's honestly, it's just been beautiful, and I'll link your book for people to be able to click through to, and I wish you all the best with it. It's a beautiful book, so thank
thank
you for
you so
writing.
much. And
Thank
thank
you.
you for the wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's been gorgeous. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean so much if you could follow the show, leave a quick rating, and maybe even a review to let others know what you think and whether they may enjoy the conversation too. Your support genuinely means so much. Thank you. Enjoy your day.